have a great panel. Panelists, please come in and be seated. And I have to tell you, this is going to be the AI party panel. There's not enough laughter. I'm glad that you guys are not laughing, because that was not a joke. This is the AI fun panel, which is not to say that the previous panels were not fun, because they've been very excellent. But this is the party panel. So we are speaking about, we're taking an international perspective, and we're looking at issues such as public policy, investment, and ethics, particularly from the standpoint of what is the practical impact on business, the practical impact on society. And to begin, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please introduce yourselves, and maybe I'll start with David Bray right here.
All right, well, greetings. My name's David Bray. I'm the executive director for what's called the People-Centered Internet Coalition, co-founded by Vint Cerf, one of the creators of the internet. And we do demonstration projects that measurably improve people's lives using the internet. Over the last 20 years, have a rather interesting history that includes bioterrorism preparedness and response, dealt with the response to 9/11, was in Afghanistan in 2009, later with the intelligence community reviewing the R&D efforts, and 4 years as human flak jacket, digital diplomat at the Federal Communications Commission.
So I'm Anthony Scriffignano, and I've learned never to introduce myself after David, but here we go. I am the chief data scientist at Dun & Bradstreet, and Dun & Bradstreet obviously is collecting information from all over the world, so I have an opportunity to work with policymakers and regulators all over the world to give them opinions on the impact of business in regulation and things like AI. I also have a team of PhD data scientists that actually do stuff. So we actually work in this field, and we try to work in this field in a way that's ethical and responsible and globally sensitive.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm Benji Susher. I'm a VP and the Chief Operating Officer of Layer 6, which is now part of TD Bank. Layer 6 offers artificial intelligence for financial institutions. Now TD Bank is our primary customer. We also do a lot of AI for good in the community as well.
Kazuo, I'm the fellow Hitachi Limited, based in Tokyo. We are doing about $80 billion business from train, logistics, healthcare, banking, government system, construct machine, and so on. All those areas are now covered by our AI, and I have rich opportunity and experience in applying AI in those very real-world applications, and I'd like to share some of them. Okay.
I'm Nazli Choucri, professor of political science at MIT, and I work in the area of cyber politics, cybersecurity, evolution of the global system, etc. And it's lots of fun.
Okay, now you can see why I was saying that we're having a party, because this is good. So to begin, I'm going to ask David to give us some background. What is the role of AI, of government in AI? Should there be a role? So maybe just set the stage for us, David, please.
Wow, okay, I'll jump on that hand grenade.
Is and should be.
Is and should be. So I think first it is worth asking, why govern? Or why do we do governance? And in fact, I like to sort of expand the definition and not just think about governments going into the future, but think about public service. Because in some respects, we may be finding that government is an outdated 19th, 20th century concept, because we did it because communication was difficult and challenging. The whole point of creating a Washington, D.C. in the United States was it took at least 2 to 3 days on horseback to all get together and have a conversation back in the 18th century. That's not necessarily the case now. And so maybe we can talk about governance, which is either done by public-private partnerships, done by professional societies, done by interested individuals of the public who choose to come together and do roles, or government employees. Now, why does this apply to AI? Well, there has to be some system that ensures it's being used as a force for good and a source for fairness. As I tried to touch on a little bit earlier in my keynote, we humans have an inherent sense of what is fair, but when you break it down, that fairness is sometimes irrational. We will turn down an offer of, say, $10 or $100 if someone else is getting the same thing for 10,000 or 100,000. Monkeys, they will reject cucumbers if they see other monkeys are getting bananas. That's not rational because it's a source of food, but it's seen as it's not fair. And so I think governance is necessary to ensure that it's both a force for good and a source for fairness. Whether it's done by governments or other activities in the future is a conversation for us all to have.
Nazli, why can't we just leave these decisions in the hands of corporations, researchers, scientists, who are the ones who really understand the problem down at the technical level? Let's just leave it in the hands of these folks and be done with it. Why not?
It's not their job. Their job is to do their job and not to deal with matters of equity and justice and governance and so forth. And can you really ask the business community to highlight or focus on matters of fairness and of justice in the household or in the corporation or whatever? This has led us to a concern about ethics and who manages the ethics, who develops the ethics. And my sense is that from a social perspective and industry and business and so forth, we really would like to be able to develop a sense of fairness and ethical behavior in this domain before the government decides that it's going to regulate our activities, kind of preempt that.
I think, because this AI and data, the sense of fairness needs to be changed. That's what we are facing. For example, your children needs to be taken to the hospital as early as possible to save his or her life. Then you drive your car, take your children to the hospital, you encounter a red signal, you need to stop. You prioritize, traffic rule over children's life. So some of the rules we rely on right now is some obsolete. From a point of view of the data era or AI era, we might be much more flexible. Then the notion of fairness or notion of obeying rule might be rethought. That's what we are facing right now. So the government has a very important role.
So maybe I could just chime in. We're using words like fairness and good, and these are words that we want to believe are universally understood in the same way, and research shows that they're not.
They're absolutely not.
We have
You're
to be
so right.
so careful with this. Now, if you take the point that Yano-san just made and you try to extrapolate it to autonomous AI, a human being, I hope, can make a decision like that. My kid is sick, I'm going to go through this red light, and I'm going to kind of, as safely as I can, look and make sure there's no cars coming. Imagine an autonomous AI agent trying to make a decision that's comparable to that for the first time. That's called goal modification. And goal modification in AI is one of the rules of, like, if you violate this, you do so at your own risk, right? So we don't know how to do that sort of thing in AI very well yet. We don't even know how to write about that sort of thing in AI very well yet. And we also don't have collective operating definitions of what good and fair mean. So we are a long way away from what seems obvious in the actual technology that we're talking about.
But Benji, is this different from any other set of technologies that have been disruptive? How is AI different from this perspective?
So it's interesting if you think back to Google CEO saying that that AI is more profound than the invention of electricity and fire. And so I think that the impact that AI has, and we see now numbers being thrown out that by in 10 years' time, there'll be $57 billion spent annually on AI. It has the opportunity to impact the global GDP by over 15 trillion, according to PwC, and McKinsey has supported that study as well. So I think that the impact, not only financially, politically, and down to each individual is astronomical, and that's why we're here talking about what should be done from a private perspective, but also from a public perspective.
Behind all this is the hidden fear of the runaway technologies.
Yeah.
All been to the movies where we've seen various versions of this.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, it's personified in the Frankenstein myth that, yeah, it's that the machine does something you never intended to. It's now, quote unquote, alive, and it's out to cause amok. I think that's part of the problem, though, is most of the public's perception of what AI is and can do comes from Hollywood, which we know sensationalizes things. And so there's a responsibility we have to have a more reasoned dialogue. The other challenge, though, is, yes, I mean, we've had 3,000 plus years of human history and philosophy, and we've not reach any common conversion other than possibly do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And even then, that varies by culture. So I don't know if we're going to ever solve a common solution of a single framework that works for all countries. And it may have to be different across different groups or sectors.
I can easily see how it can happen by accident, though, as water on a stone. So the logic will go something like this. We are going to let AI make this decision because human beings can't make it fast enough. Human beings can't think that fast. AI can, and we need it because we have to decide which vessel to cauterize or which bad guy to shoot or whatever, or whether or not to start a war or whether or not to engage in some way that is epic. And someone is going to little by little say, in this set of scenarios, we need to react faster than human beings, and we're going to cede that decision to this sort of quasi-unexplainable neuromorphic blah, blah, blah thing that's going to do it for us. And that's the moment where we've given up our control. I say all the time, everybody says, I'll never report to a robot, and then Outlook tells you to go to a meeting and you go. So we're already halfway there. We just have to think about what's going on.
But we can add a clause to your scenario, and that is, suppose we were to take seriously the notion of the precautionary principle, which has been thought about elsewhere. At least it constrains a little bit.
I'm not saying it's an unsolvable problem. I'm saying it's a problem that will get away from us if we let it.
Yep.
And so
I think we're in violent agreement.
So that actually maybe relates to what some countries are already beginning to use machine learning and AI to help with their economy or help with their society. So the question is, we somehow seem comfortable with the invisible hand of quote-unquote economics, which we know there's a wonderful paper from 2000 that looks at game theory and actually looks at how humans actually play out game theory, and it only correlates 30% of the time. So economics has its flaws too, but it seems like we're comfortable with the quote-unquote invisible hand of economics, but we don't seem to be comfortable with the invisible hand of AI.
Well, I can just imagine talking with some government officials about policy, describing neuromorphic blah, 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 as you just said. And
I've actually had to do that, and it was a fun time was had by all, I can assure you.
This is a fun panel.
To David's point, there was a study, and you probably know the actual study, I can't remember it, where they were looking at what's called adversarial methods, like letting one AI method compete against another AI method. And it was around Go, and it was sort of during the let's beat AlphaGo stage. And one of the options that they gave the AI was to fire a laser at the opponent and kill them.
Right.
And the AI went to that laser way faster than a human being would.
Yes. Well, and also on that, there's also, real quick for folks on examples, there's also where they actually were trying to have the AI develop its own communication back and forth.
And that was terrifying.
And they actually unplugged it because they couldn't follow what it was saying to each other anymore.
Yeah, right.
Actually, I don't agree with those kind of AI as subject of sentence. Everything subject or is the humans. AI, we make every decision, even AI, the design, testing, specification, all by done human.
Yeah.
So, HAL 9000 in Odyssey 2001.
Yeah.
That story is very absurd because after very erroneous operation, nothing happens of the responsibility problem. Just, having fear on the red eye on the wall.
I totally agree with you that we shouldn't anthropomorphize AI.
Right.
Make it. However, I will say that we are increasingly creating scenarios where we create systems that have the ability to create their own capability that is not always completely explainable to us. So while it's not a thing that has an intelligence unto itself, it can behave in a non-deterministic way that we didn't anticipate when we created it.
So can we articulate what we mean in human thinking about the word empathy, for example, and transfer that to a machine
I would say no. I would say we could create a machine that will pass the Turing test where we think it's behaving empathetically, but no. I would like to believe the answer to that is no.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and let's talk about what do we want from governments when it comes to AI policy. For example, Benji, you've been the beneficiary of Canadian policies.
Yeah, so I think that this was a good segue into exactly what I wanted to talk about as we were going through here. So Canada, as Inmar presented previously, has a 10-day tech visa program. So if I wanted to hire an employee from anywhere in the world, regardless of their background, and Toronto in particular is 50% of its people are born outside of the country, or multiculturalism. And so having these different perspectives, views, educational backgrounds, as well as training, and it all leads to different perspectives that lead into training, that lead into potentially increased empathy, but also perspectives as it relates to the biases. So being able to prevent biases earlier on by having different perspectives together allows or facilitates a more robust system being developed from the beginning.
If I could just add one thing about bias. Eliminating bias sometimes produces another type of bias. So what I always encourage in my team is to understand the bias and the implication of that bias on the decision that we're making. Not necessarily to always try to drive it out, because sometimes by doing that, we're creating some sort of unintentional other effect.
Absolutely, and what better than to have over 50% of people from different backgrounds being able to contribute to creating that. And that's what I think is a phenomenal government policy and initiative to be able to promote and facilitate that.
So creating jobs is one dimension, enabling visas and so forth is, of course, extremely important, but there are other aspects of this as well. So for example, Kazuo, you have been researching happiness.
Yeah.
Please tell us about that. And is that a dimension of government policy? Do governments really care about our happiness? And where does AI fit into that?
Actually, the AI, the important feature is outcome-oriented. So combine outcome data with the condition action data without knowing the underlying logic. So bigger and more important outcome set, we can make better and bigger results. And but on the contrary, if you take weaker and unimportant outcome, the AI's impact will be weaker. So in our society, the biggest objective and biggest purpose is called happiness. And actually, we have this vision and combine quantified happiness with AI to make every decision in society to be aligned with people's happiness. So we made a technology to quantify human happiness by accelerometer. Inside every smartphone you already have, there is an accelerometer inside, and that allows us to capture the motion of your body. That allows us to quantify happiness.
You have to, sorry for interrupting, but you have to explain how motion of the accelerometer in your phone translates into
the mojo,
actually,
your movement.
Our movement has a very honest signal. Even though you are sitting, you are not completely stopping. You're moving, stopping. And we have discovered with very big data that after start moving and stop moving, that duration of the happy people is diversified and fluctuating. Unlike the unhappy people shows very uniform and not, elastic. So anyway, we have our state-of-the-art technology allows us to quantify happiness by our your phones, and all the government policy or GDP can be replaced by happiness, and those kind of massive possibilities is now appeared. And UAE government, Dubai They invited me to make a big conference, like World Government Summit in February, or Happy City Conference in May, because they appointed Minister of Happiness 2 years ago, and every law needs to be assessed by the Minister of Happiness to be a law. So any law needs to be aligned with, citizens' happiness. So this data and quantified happiness allows a very new opportunity for everyone.
So can I follow up on this, and let's turn it on its head. What do we want governments not to do? Okay? So we've been talking about open societies and democratic societies, et cetera. The one thing we don't want governments to do is to monopolize, control the human skills, the resources, the technologies of the society that presumably would be distributed in the market or in society, and appropriate them for purposes of pursuing the government's objectives. And there are some candidate countries that fit into this category.
So I have an opportunity to speak to those
candidate countries. Yeah.
One of the things that I've been saying, and this is probably going to get me in trouble, is we don't need an AI DPR. Like, we don't need some regulation that tries to put all the AI in a box and say, if you're going to do AI, you have to do it here, and you can't do AI about our citizens over there, because AI is so poorly defined. We had enough trouble doing that with data, which doesn't even have a definition, and now we're going to try and do it with AI. It's like trying to control oxygen. What we need to do is control the behaviors. We need to control the outcomes. We need to control the ways in which the AI, the intentionality of the purpose, and maybe the negligent use of that purpose, maybe the unintentional use of that purpose. So the outcomes, as opposed to trying to put a square around the AI and say, you got to keep it here, or this is how it has to behave. That's a hopeless cause, in my opinion.
So, listening to what everyone's been saying, I think, at least I take the viewpoint that technology is a tool and itself is amoral. It's how we choose how to use it that decides whether it's good versus bad. Lest we forget that Mumbai terrorist attacks that happened in 2009, they used web search, they used GPS, they used social media to both plan the attacks and figure out who they eventually executed.
And to launch them.
And so I don't think we'd say we don't want GPS, I don't think we'd say we don't want web search, but it's how the humans use it decides whether it's good or bad. And so AI, you may develop as a company the ability to actually have it queue when it walks by someone on the street and says, this is your colleague, you last met them 2 years ago, they have 2 kids, they're married to their wife, et cetera, et cetera. That's great until someone decides to use that same technology to figure out who they want to rob or who they want to target for certain attacks. And are you, that company, then responsible because you put forward that technology for good and somebody else used it for bad?
So one of the big questions, we have laws that govern how your human agents act on your behalf. So if I hire somebody to deliver dynamite and they blow somebody up, I'm still negligent, right? We don't have laws to cover digital agency in the same way. That would be a good start.
That would be a start. The other thing is also, it's great that we talk about happiness and it talks about, recognizing, again, the machines, the goals are set by humans. And so it's not going to be that the machine comes up with a different goal outside its subset. And even with the example of lasers, that was provided to them as a choice. The challenge I have is if you look at pluralistic societies, it's been shown that diversity only works if you have shared goals. And I think partly what we're seeing, particularly in Western nations right now, is a lack of leadership to set shared goals up front, and you have polarization of those societies because they each are pursuing different goals.
Everybody's trying to win something different.
Yeah, but wait a second. But David, let me ask the panel to respond to David's comment that we have lack of shared goals, but there's a large country, for example, in Asia that has a very clearly defined singular goal.
And make sure everybody else follows it.
And that makes sure everybody, and they're building a social credit system using AI to analyze lots and lots of different data.
And they're actually light years ahead of everyone else in AI.
So isn't that incredible? Because we've just eliminated this set of divergent views, and we now have harmony and greater happiness, maybe.
You have a set of guiding principles. You have a 5-year plan that's renewed. You have a set of policies that are taken from those principles. But to say that everyone has exactly the same goal is I don't think a
how
fair
about
characterization
values?
of what's
How
going
about-
on in that particular part of the world. I think that you have to, I'm sorry, I think you have to also, we have to resist the temptation to just label that as good or bad or right or wrong, and we have to say that it is what it is. There's this, you stop when you want to say he's a jerk or he's difficult, you just say he is, right? It is what it is. And when I look at the social credit system that you're talking about, and I look at the no-fly list, I think they're equally obscure. So I'm not saying either one of those is a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying that neither of them is unique.
Nazli had a comment. I'm going to ask everybody now to keep your answers relatively short because
Just like that, right?
less than 10 minutes left, and I would like to be able to take some questions from the audience. So Nazli, go ahead.
My comment is very simple. Maybe it's not a question of goals. Maybe it's a question of maybe shared values of some sort. Period.
That's hard too, though. 3,000 years of human history, wars. I mean, I think if anything, we're going to recognize there's going to be different values and different goals for different people, even in what looks like a homogeneous system.
No.
The question is, how do you
Kazuo,
embrace that?
yeah.
The important thing is, the goal or purpose and the approach to reach the goal or purpose is quite different. AI usually standardizes the goal, but the way is much more flexible as compared with the conventional system, which standardized the approach itself.
That's a good point.
So we can be much more free, have more freedom in AI and data era, but we need to have shared goal. That's something very different, aspect of the system of AI.
But and I think ultimately, though, we're trying to at least distinguish between guiding principles and fundamental laws that enable development as well as humans living together in a society versus a very prescriptive approach to what can or can't be done and how that can be done. And I think that's fundamentally what we're discussing on this panel right now is what impact or effect should government have and to what degree, and how do you ultimately facilitate the evolution of right now this technology and how it impacts society.
Let me ask a very practical question, and Benji, this is for you. So at the beginning of this panel, I asked, okay, what's so unique about AI? And somebody said, well, a big part of it is the enormous economic impact. You're an investor, you invest in companies, and so how do you think about government policy and AI in terms of the investments? It's a very practical business issue. And I'll ask you to keep your answer really short, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and I still fundamentally believe that capitalism is a great way to govern society. And it's proven to work over many, many years, and there's political science experts here that may beg to differ or at least give different commentary about the use of capitalism. But ultimately, for-profit companies that operate within a specific system that will be, if you use a voting system, voted either higher or lower in terms of share prices or economics, and ultimately facilitating the inflow of capital, will ultimately, be, I think, the ultimate judge.
Not perfect.
Real quick,
Okay, guys, sorry.
I have to do real quick, short. Just one final.
See, this is where the moderator loses
sorry,
the
we're the
war.
fun panelists.
Okay,
Don't
go
mess
ahead.
with him. He can take you out.
Two real quick things is if you talk to people that actually write the trading algorithms right now that are doing the stock market, most of them will say it is a bit of a black box where it copies what other algorithms do. And I think this gets to Anthony's earlier point. We may discover a flash crash happens, if not has already happened, simply because the wrong signals presented themselves and the machines acted on it. That's already the case right now. The second thing, though, is, again, I celebrate that, again, we set shared goals for the machine, but let's say you set the shared goal of happiness for everybody. The machine says, I can solve that. I give everybody $1 million. OK, now you just created inflation. I know. Then you say, OK, you can't give people money. It says, OK, I'm going to give them drugs. OK, you can't do that. The trouble with setting shared goals is there's a lot of different footnotes that follow after
caffeine.
that.
Okay,
Make them
guys,
move
here's
along.
where
Yeah,
the
it
moderator
gets really bad.
rests back control. Okay.
Then the metric will go up.
But I just raised that because
No,
Here's where
it's going to be a
No,
messy
it's the
issue,
last
and I think
thing.
we're still
I think
pinning our
it's
hopes on
gone, it's
government,
gone.
and
And
it's got to
this
be
is
us.
why we can't get anything done in government.
Right.
Okay, all right, we have 5 minutes and 30 seconds, 29.
27.
27. Let me ask each of you to give me like a tweet-sized comment of advice to policymakers. Boil down everything you know into like a tweet-sized piece of advice. Which end shall we start from?
I'm happy
Okay.
to go.
Okay, Nazli, we start from that end.
140 characters.
See what you can learn from successful experiences such as the management of the nuclear arms, whatever it is, the chemical.
Okay, that was a tweet. Thank you very much. Kazuo.
Okay. Don't follow other countries' policy. AI is much more diversified, make you more flexible and diversified.
Okay, so we have so far follow the examples of what works, and then we have don't follow other examples, do what's right for you. Okay, Benji?
So I'd facilitate openness, understanding, empathy, and ultimately
Love, happiness, and all that.
Love,
Feels good. That's
happiness.
good. Okay, good. Anthony?
It's a tweet, right? So focus on the outcomes, not on the specific technology. Covfefe.
Covfefe. Right. Okay, the old Covfefe answer. Does everybody know what that is? All right,
They
you can
have
look it up.
web search, they can find it.
Just
It was
Google
a
it.
tweet.
And David, you're last.
Yep. Last 30 years, tech empowered individuals. We need to invest in tech that empowers communities.
And I'll just make the comment, realize it's way more complex than you could possibly imagine. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you to this panel.
Good job. Thank you.